So today we got a book where it's a small one, it's a subject matter that I've read a lot about, but there's so much packed into it, and that is Mountainhead by New Juche, which I probably said wrong. Now, I usually don't like to give a lot of background to books in a sense, but this one will require a lot of background. It is a sexual travelogue of a man. Um, he lives in a country in Europe, and he goes to the Klong in Thailand. Now, the Klong in Thailand is imagine a cyberpunk dystopian future, but with all the technology. It is just a poor, slummy hovel. It's just poor, just bunch of prostitution. There's a scene in the novel where a dog falls in the lake and nobody wants to go in to rescue it because the water is just so oily and they're like, I'm not gonna go in there, it's gonna kill us. So it's a bad place on many levels. And the author lives there. He gets acclimated. Mind you, this is an autobiography, so he gets acclimated to the location. He becomes friends with the people. He learns the language. He lives in an abandoned hotel, uh, and he just like, yeah, I just want to be here because it's sexually gratifying for me. And also, he's a photographer, so he'll have a lot of really nice pictures. Well, maybe not. I don't know. I'm not a photographer, but I'll enjoy the picture mainly because they remind me of the movie Begotten. If you've ever seen that movie, it's just all nice black and whites. And he has one at the beginning of each chapter. Oh, really quick. This is also a recommendation from Christopher Robinson, Big Hole H&W on Instagram. He recommended me this book with several others like Cows. And also, he has some music for reading from ambient music, which I've been listening to the past year myself. So I'm going to put that in the description. Sorry if I'm all over the place. This is my third time recording this video. Oh, also, a new Juche, I'm sorry, getting wrong. It's the Korean term for North Korea, like let's make North Korea self-sufficient. Let's really get this together. And so he's kind of appropriating that because it's a pseudonym for the new and the Juche. To what effect, I don't know. I gotta read more of the author to find out. And maybe there's really not a reason for it. I'm not sure. But anyway, so the beginning of this book kind of starts off like with a lot of gay porn fantasy kind of stuff where it takes place in a public bathroom. Except the people he's seeing in the public bathroom having sex are all disabled, they're all handicapped, and that entices him. That really gets him going, and you see that reflected throughout the rest of the book. Now, before we go further into sexual actions, there's also where he talks about his child and his young adult phase where his relation to sexuality and porn and how that shaped him. And I really like this section because I think it's a lot more common nowadays. We often think about finding our sexuality with another person. Sex is defined with our other experiences with other people, but especially nowadays, and even true to myself, like pornography is so widely available, and with the dropping sex rates, there's probably a lot more people now than ever where pornography helped sculpt their sexuality and their sexual experiences. Um, and so there's probably either very independent, different ways people have towards pornography, and probably a lot of similar stuff as well. One example in the book is where he sees a candid person. He has a video of a candid lady taking off her bikini, and he freeze frames on her breast so he can, pleasure himself too. But when he finally gets that freeze frame, because it's such a short clip, he doesn't like it. It's not enticing. So he lets the clip play, and having that lack of control is more enticing to him. And I think it's probably true for a lot of people in a lot of regards. And also, there's another scene where he has some girly magazines growing up, but they're all of older women who just have like are very saggy, not appealing, and he's kind of embarrassed of it. He doesn't want to tell his friends because he knows his friends are doing it to like younger women and everything like that. But it entices him so much. And then we see this reflected in the Klong. The experiences he has there is that it's like in the first chapter, he has a lot of sexual experiences with trans people, men to women who haven't transitioned in the best way. And what I mean by that, in more of the surgical terms, is that he really appreciates all the scarring from the mastectomies on them. He likes how they still have their genitalia from birth on them and everything. He still likes how they look like men, all these things that are abject, he finds arousing. And, he develops relationships, like in a prostitution kind of sense, but like one where he keeps seeing these people over and over again and he gets to know them by name and he gets to know the characteristics alike. And then there's another woman too who is very obese and he just wants it so bad. Like he's like, oh man, she's so fat. I don't know, it's just something about her just really entices me. She's another prostitute, and he's just like, I just gotta have her. And he does stuff with her. He tries to goad him into sex and everything, but he never penetrates her. But he's just so enamored by this woman. So there is the aspect of the abject going on in this novel, and he even mentions it later on in the conversation. However, I want to preface it also and be careful because this is not a situation, in my opinion, of somebody going to another land like, oh, look at these savages, oh, let me just use up these prostitutes and whatnot. New Juche really has an appreciation for these people. And while the object element is there, that being which disgusts us makes us more sexually attracted to, he doesn't see these characters as subhuman in any way. In fact, when he mentions Western tourists in the novel, he doesn't talk to them really. He kind of just sees them as another. Even one prostitute he's really friends with and almost kind of a relationship with, she's like, yeah, they just don't seem real. I misread that word, just like it was him saying the prostitutes seem like illusions that are not real, but she was saying that all the Johns just don't seem real. So even like a prostitute in this novel has a connection to him, but doesn't have a connection to the Western tourist. Probably for the fact that he's living there, and also he has a sense of awareness because he even says the horrors I experience in my life are nothing compared to yours. Where the prostitutes in the Klong who can't leave the situation are just they're screwed. They can't escape. This is their life. He doesn't say this in the novel, but there's probably something in the back of his head. He can always go back to Europe, but he stays in the Klong and he gets that attachment, but he knows that he's not on the same level as these prostitutes. In some ways, I think that makes him a bit jealous as well. Now, let's not make the mistake also, just because he's coming from a wealthier country to this country doesn't mean he can't integrate in the culture. We often think of immigration, of people from poorer countries coming to a rich country, especially in America, but the reverse doesn't invalidate the experience whatsoever, in my opinion. And now, speaking of the simulation he has with this place, let's talk about the symbology of the mountain. It's the parallels I can draw to it would be stuff like the Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann and Mount Analog, the one the Jodorowsky film was based off of. Well, he says, and it's on the back of the book, that just as earthworms need dirt to be within their nature, I need the mountain to be within my nature. It's this feeling that he can't do this anywhere else in the world. Much like the Magic Mountain, where they're talking about like the either Swiss or German, no, the Swiss air being rejuvenating, and but then it's also boring because they just sit around and lounge all day, and this is where they send all the sick people to get better. And there's that aspect where it's like this part of the world helps you get better. There's that mysticism with mountains where it creates a special environment that you just can't get anywhere else. As an ocean dweller, I don't have that same connection to mountains. I haven't lived near any mountains like that or anything like that, just in hilly areas. So I don't totally grasp it, I will admit. But there's a scene at the end of the novel where it shows that more, where he's in the rain crawling around the mountain, and it's almost like a BDSM scene from Sod, where he's talking about like how he's getting whipped by the rain, his lips are bleeding from crawling around. He's getting messed up. It's like the mountain out of nature are doing all these sadomasochistic elements to his body. I don't know about you, but I couldn't really describe the ocean like that. But that just reflects so beautifully with the stuff he's able to engage in. And I don't really necessarily want to say get rid of his inhibitions, but go to his true nature. Kind of like where he couldn't talk about the porn he liked with his friends. He can definitely, even more so than just the porn, he can definitely explore himself in this area of the world. And the mountain helps facilitate that. I will also say the economics of the place facilitate that with all the Westerners coming with the prostitutes. And unfortunately, there's also a lot of child prostitution. So the extreme poverty of the place allows them to experience it to that fullest degree. Not to say prostitution and child trafficking doesn't exist in other parts of the world, but it seemed like there's a special thing with the Klong where it just kind of amplifies it. And again, not to say that that amplification can't happen in other parts of the world. I'm sure other people will tell me, well, I don't know how many of you guys are going to third world countries for sex. There's just a specialness that you really feel with the Klong. Now, let me talk about some more controversial elements. He has some pedophilic urges in this novel. He rescues a girl from a pool, and he gets really excited by the sight of her breast, and just starts imagining, like, he's like, oh, I saved this person, but not even gonna bother to make me their wives or that stuff and everything. He doesn't do anything to her, but it's definitely in his head. But at the same time, he's not like unaware of his urges or unaware of the effects his urges might have. There's a scene earlier, and it's only like a paragraph or two, and I wish it was explored. He has this friend named Bahamut, edgelord, I know, but she is a pimp to all these children in the Klong. And he does get a blowjob from the children, but while he's doing it, he's thinking like, man, this is so normalized for these kids. It's almost like the trauma doesn't even register with them, or does it? And he even says, like, this has an effect on me and my sexuality. Seeing the kids in this situation where prostitution was just so normal, almost like picking fruit for them in some respects, or going to the playground, it affected him. He doesn't really go into how it affected him so much. And he doesn't go into the thought process, but I wish it was an area that was more explored. Now, because it's the internet and everything, I'm not advocating for child prostitution in any manner. I'm thinking of this more in the aspect of like Chekhov with the unanswerable question. Well, these things that would be so detrimental and harmful in the West, and for some reason the environment is created here where it's just so normalized. And it's almost, you gotta think of it in the sense that like how some kids are just fine with hunting. Like a Western child killing a goat or shooting a deer, they'll probably cry about it on the first time, but if you grow up with hunting, you get used to it. You get used to seeing dead animals and everything like that. But then there's a difference between like when a kid's killing dead animals for pleasure and when somebody's hunting for them. And maybe there is a parallel between that and the kids in this situation. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not saying it's justifiable necessarily. I'm just saying that like that aspect of another culture was like, wow, I didn't know that this could be here, and what effect does that have on me? And it's traumatizing to him. And it's a horrible situation that absolutely sucks. Some levity though, when her boyfriend breaks up with him, one of Juniche's friends, she gets thrown down and gets gravel from a motorcycle thrown in her face. And if you want any more indication that she's a total a-hole, then she hires a hitman to try to kill them, so they have to hide out at a house for like a while and everything. So just a monstrous person, absolutely. But just kind of shows, almost like, again, the French decadence movement, how we've sanitized so much stuff in the West. Most of it for the better. Don't get me twisted. But, when you think back, it's like, maybe back in olden times, this wasn't so different. Foucault talks about that in his History of Sexuality, from the 1 or 2 pages I've read, where, I think it was back in medieval times, people knew that kids had sexual relations with adults. Look at the Greeks as well. It's just this odd thing in part of human history. Like, yeah, this happens, unfortunately. Is it good or bad? Maybe it depends on the culture. Who knows? What's the definite correct answer? You want my answer? Leave the damn kids alone. Now let's get into the idea of like fetishes. And what I mean by that is like the object of a fetish. Kind of like in the novel Fallows with Delaney, where the Fallows just means so much more than the actual dildo itself. He has scenes in this novel, and it really struck me, and I feel like it struck him as well, where when he's with these prostitutes, they have altars with figures from their religion there, mixed with pornography. Like, nudie magazines and stuff like that. It almost reminded me, again, in Mexico, some parts of Mexico, where Coca-Cola is more available than water. So when they give offerings to the god, they give Coca-Cola. But also, like, it was just such a striking image that should seem so out of place, but it didn't. And maybe the out of placeness made it seem so appropriate. Not like a ready-made, but just something that you just can't describe necessarily. And if you really think about it, like, a lot of the meaning to it that was probably subscribed later to it. There was a very violent element to the crucifixion of Christ, but everybody wears it on the neck and doesn't associate it with violence. It's really interesting how we got rid of that element in some ways. And also, I like to think of Freud and Jung, even though I'm not fans of these guys, but I think it was Jung who talked about, you know, something is religious when you experience it. Like, there's just kind of something priori about that. And I've experienced that before. As somebody who's not religious, one time I went to a church with my mom, and I haven't been in a church in a while, and I was like, oh, wow, there's kind of a gravity to this place. I don't believe in the symbols. I don't believe in the God or anything like that, but there's a gravity to this place that I just can't deny. And same thing with the pornography with the altars. There's a gravity to that I just can't deny. And I think New Juche picked up on that as well. And what is the meaning behind that? Well, if you go by the Bataille theory, you know, like religion and sexuality is always going to be intertwined, but maybe there's just something priori about it that it's not just that can't be described, or maybe the meaning will be placed on later. Another example of that, and I've experienced this in my life, I'm going to show a video of a place that I've kind of felt this, that's always stuck in my mind, is that he talks, after he saves the girl from the pool, he talks about shower heads. He goes to wash off her vomit, and he just kind of keeps going on about shower heads and how the perfect number of them and how they kind of just resonate together like a guitar chord and whatnot. And at first I'm like, oh my god, what are we talking about? Shower heads now? Really? Like, but then it's like, oh wait, sometimes these places do just kind of strike you. If you're a Zoomer, you probably heard of the concept of liminal spaces that they talked about, but it's kind of like that, where you're just kind of in an empty school, or you're just in an empty gym, and it's like, oh man, this place just kind of strikes me differently right now. Again, it's kind of like that religious gravity. Now I kind of realize that those are not really fetishes, but whatever. And all those normalized elements just provide a great mysticism to the Klon. To the point where there's one part of where they're talking about a fire-breathing witch that they see there. And it's like, wait, that's so out of place. But then it's like, well, when you're in a rural place, when you're in certain stuff, you kind of start believing things that could happen that you wouldn't believe otherwise. Like when I was in Mexico as a teenager, and they were telling us this ghost stories, you know, stuff like La Llorona and stuff like that, those stuff, like, whatever. But God, when you're walking in the darkness of Mexico where there's no lights and it's a really rural part of the country, those ghosts feel so nothing feels more real than those stories. With all these pseudo-mystical elements, or just mystical elements going on in combination, it kind of does make credence like, hey, I'm not saying fire-breathing witches are real, but maybe he experienced something to that effect. So we have this book with all these, on the surface, horrid sexual practices, and it just seems like somebody's being a deviant, but I think there's a lot to this book, and I think the author picked up on a lot of this stuff very subtly, and he did a great job of portraying it. Also, the prose is not super intense. He does have his parts of fancy, and he gets really prosaic about it, and it's really well done. And he's really good at helping you visualize what's going on in the novel. One more scene I want to talk about, just to show how crazy the Klong is that they have like a stampede of scorpions. Yeah, I said that right, like a stampede, where he captures one scorpion, he looks out, it's like, oh my god, it's just scorpions everywhere, and he has to check his room and sweep them out before he can go to bed and everything. This place is a mad hole, but like, yeah, that is Mountainhead by New Juche, and I really recommend it. It's only 160 pages, but it touches on so many themes that I've been exploring through literature in a new light, and somebody who I think is around my age. I think he's in his 30s to 40s or so, and he just does a great job of it, and he's just able to relate to a lot of stuff. And the balls on this guy for just going to this place and living there and experiencing it to the fullest is amazing. I couldn't do that. I would die like on the flight there. But also, when you read about the intense pleasure that he gets from like watching midgets with huge breasts and stuff like that, and out of these abnormal people, it makes sense why he threw away his life just to be there, because there's experiences there that he's experiencing that it seems like you just can't experience in any Western country. But yeah, that's Mountain by New Juche. Total recommend. Absolutely pick it up. Love it.